Well, go ahead. I'm going to start fine-tuning on some of the video here while we were talking. I have links on the website for your latest article, and perhaps you'd like to talk about that.
Right. A couple things I want to discuss today. I'd like to discuss, first of all, Governor Brown signing this physician-assisted suicide bill into law in California, and it's a very controversial issue, assisted suicide. And also, I'd like to say a few things about the escalation of events in Syria now that Russia has gotten itself involved and is bombing ISIS. So let's start with the article. It's on the front page of NEO today, New Eastern Outlook, and it is entitled, California's Governor Brown Strikes Another Blow Against the Vulnerable. And it certainly, in case you didn't know if I had an opinion on this issue, I think the headline will let you know that I certainly do have an opinion. So the article discusses the signing of end-of-life options into law in California, which happened on October 5th. Physician-assisted suicide is now the law of the land in California. Now, is this a problem? I think it is a problem for several reasons. First of all, I'd like to say that assisted suicide is an issue that has a lot of controversy around it. And my particular viewpoint on this is that if people do want to end their lives, that's really between them and their creator. It is not something that the state should intrude into. And this brings us to one of the first concerns about Governor Jerry Brown in California signing the End-of-Life Options Act into law. In his signing message to the Assembly, he made a number of questionable statements, some of them actually false. He stated, "The crux of the matter is whether the state of California should continue to make it a crime for a dying person to end his life." It's not a crime in California. Suicide is not a crime in California.
It'd be hard to enforce. I guess you'd have to raise them from the dead to.
Put people's dead rear ends in jail, right? I don't think so. But it's not a crime, and so it raises some questions of why Governor Brown, who formerly as the Attorney General of the state of California, might know that this is not a crime. Nevertheless, he wanted to make it appear that it was a crime, and that he has exonerated all these suicide dead people from prosecution. Okay. There's also the other concerns in his signing message. He made some statements about how he anguished over this, and what would he do if he were in prolonged and excruciating pain. Well, the state of palliative care has pretty much rendered this prolonged and excruciating pain into oblivion. So, we've got some concerns as to Brown's presentation, attempting to present the situation to be different as it is. Now, I was contacted by someone, who was telling me that in California, who was really in favor of assisted suicide, and she had a number of false perceptions. She thought it was a crime. And she also thought that it was impossible to commit suicide to obtain the required end-of-life medication without the law making it permissible for a doctor to give this. And the fact is, people have been ending their lives for decades. I believe that very often the end-of-life medication is phenobarbital, and people have been known to go to the doctors and say, "I can't sleep," get phenobarbital, and go home and kill themselves. So getting the medication is not illegal, and killing yourself is not illegal, no matter what Governor Brown says. So I want to talk a little bit more about this issue. and I'm going to be quoting some of the experts here. There are problems around the whole construct of the issue. First of all, the laws as written are defining terminal disease as within, someone who will die within 6 months. In Oregon, which has a nearly identical definition of terminal disease, people who are eligible for the medication, end-of-life medication, include young adults with chronic conditions such as insulin-dependent diabetes. These are treatable conditions, which are nevertheless defined as, terminal disease. So there are other issues, and if one looks at the history of what has happened when countries have passed these laws, and I'm thinking specifically of Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, what we're seeing now happen in those venues is of grave concern, because the existence of these laws is enabling what has been called the slippery slope. The slippery slope is evidencing when people are now being euthanized in, the Netherlands and in Belgium without their consent or without requesting this. In addition, psychiatric patients are now being euthanized. Now, all of the laws as written are stating that excruciating pain does not include psychiatric conditions. Nevertheless, when the slippery slope gets engaged, we're finding that people are, psychiatric patients are being euthanized. And this is really of concern. If someone is in mental agony, let's say someone's very depressed, there are options other than death. There are counselors. When people are facing the darkest and worst times of their life, this is a challenge that can be overcome. And for people to take the quick and easy way out and for the state to make that available for people is, I think, very problematic. I want to give a couple of instances of Switzerland and their assisted suicide laws. Recently, it was in the news that an Italian woman traveled to Switzerland. Switzerland now has suicide tourism. People from other places in the European Union are going to Switzerland because of the laws there permitting assisted suicide. So an Italian woman who was in her early 80s, had no terminal illness, but she was unhappy because being in her 80s, she'd lost her looks. And she didn't want to live anymore because she wasn't gorgeous anymore due to age. And she went to Switzerland and went to Dignitas, and they helped her die.
Dignitists?
That's what Dignitas, Dignitas. It's, along with the death with the dignity sort of. So that was one instance. Another instance was a school teacher in England who was depressed at the modern world. She thought people were becoming, she used the word more and more like robots. She didn't like the whole, computer culture and the way people, she didn't like the way the world was turning out, and so she went to Dignitas to die. So these are the kind of situations that are being enabled by the passage of assisted suicide laws.
I want to pop in as far as you're saying about the slippery slope. Here's an example of something that's already happened. It's not about killing, but I think it's a good example of government. In Illinois, they had a fight for gambling. Gambling was illegal in Illinois. So they came up with the riverboat gambling. They were going to have a boat go down the river, with the big paddle wheels, and they have the gambling games that associated with those days. You know, it goes from card games and so forth. Limits. It's only for 45-minute rides, and you have to get back off. And if you want to get back on again, you could. And well, that's what that's was passed. And then what happened? It took a few years, okay, but they took in Joliet, Illinois. They took a place that was land, and they cut out a hole in next to the river, and of course, water went in there. And they put a boat in there that stayed fixed to the land. You know, they walk up on it, and it became a casino. So it's a riverboat, and of course, it was a full-blown casino like L.A. or Las Vegas. So it's like that was the whole point. They talked about how they're going to do it, and here's what it came down. So when you talk about the slippery slope, you know, it sounds like, well, you know, these people are suffering, and they want to be able to, instead of having to stumble around, you know, blow their head off or you know, choke on pills, perhaps, and all this stuff. Here's a nice way that they can go about doing it. Well, take the slippery slope, and now you're going to have government deciding who lives and dies. Oh, if you're born retarded, well, you know, they're going to have a rough life with retardation, so we could just, you know, euthanize them before they even get started. And if they're going to have a gimp leg, you know, then we're going to have to do this. And then it's like, you know, if they're from a lower income family, you know, they're going to have, they'll turn out to be crooks. You know, and that's how I see it all happening.
The Netherlands has actually, which is one of the venues that originally passed assisted suicide laws, recently amended or passed a new law allowing the euthanizing of children. So we can see that slippery slope already taking place in the Netherlands. There are a couple of other issues of concern here. One is a report recently came out from a medical journal that was looking at the overall rates of suicide in venues that had passed assisted suicide laws into effect. And the purpose of the study was to see if the passage of laws caused a spike in people killing themselves, not necessarily going to the doctors and getting the end of life medication, but the overall suicide rates, to see if somehow this becoming an approved act encourages more people to commit suicide, and it does. So it has an effect. It has a sort of subliminal effect on the culture and the mentality of people who might be considered vulnerable. The other issue I think of grave concern is the potential intersection of these laws with the guardianship laws. Because when a person is under guardianship, you have that guardian making those end-of-life decisions frequently for their wards. And as we know, in California, as elsewhere, we have had an extensive and ongoing issue with the Department of Justice, California Department of Justice, simply agreeing to even investigate reports of crimes committed by guardians against their wards. Those crimes can either be monetary, it can have to do with theft, or it can have to do with reports which have already come into the Department of Justice in California alleging that the guardians have murdered their wards. The office, the AG's office in California, which is now headed up by Kamala Harris, has issued a statement saying, we're not going to investigate these crimes. So they're already providing cover. So when you factor in that guardians, are making end-of-life decisions for the ward, when you factor in the assisted suicide laws into the equation, you have a recipe for murder.
I'm starting to look at it. So if you have a family member who has let's say, a rich father or mother who's aged and not lucid, or perhaps lucid, and they want to get him out of the way. I mean, is it possible that under this law they could arrange for a quote suicide and be a witness to it, and literally killing them, but saying it's a suicide, and that's okay, or it has to go through some kind of a doctor or something?
That's a very good question, and this has been, an issue that has been discussed quite a bit with people who are concerned about assisted suicide. And as the California law is written, you a person who would stand an heir, a potential heir, someone who would stand to benefit financially from their parents' death, is allowed to participate in the assisted suicide process. They are permitted to participate in helping to sign the parent up for the lethal dose, and they are allowed to be present at the consumption of the lethal dose. So, when you have somebody who is older and possibly more easily influenced than when they are younger, I'm sure you can fill in the blanks here and see what may happen. And there is not enough protection provided under these laws. And furthermore, when you have a situation where you have a state like California, which is already tacitly exonerating murder by guardian, and if you don't believe this is happening, folks, do your research. When you have Kamala Harris's office already averting her eyes from these reports, refusing to investigate, then how do we think that this law is going to protect anybody? There is another issue. There is another issue which has to do with the falsification of the death certificate. I believe it is Oregon. No, I'm sorry. It's Washington that I know of, possibly Oregon also, but I do know state of Washington, which passed an assisted suicide law several years ago. It requires the issuance of a falsified death certificate. Now, this is being done to, protect the privacy of the person who opted for assisted suicide. So the falsified death certificate, which is mandated by law in the state of Washington, will say that the person died of natural causes. So
holy cow! There's no room for abuse there, is there?
The privacy of the dead person. Okay. Now, this is another factor which is going to enable covering up what may be something that is not kosher at all.
So there's no paperwork showing that it was so somebody has the suicide, they have the natural causes, and then a family member or loved one is aware of this, and they go to investigate. All they're going to find is the natural death certificate.
That's right.
Can't. Well.
Yeah, you got it.
Why am I surprised? Why am I surprised?
Problem. So, I do want to say that a lot of, what appears to be what appear to be good laws, what appear to be, assistive, compassionate laws, need to be looked at in context. They need to be looked at in the context of the society in which these laws are being enacted, and also they need to be looked at in the context of what the government that is passing these laws is actually doing. So that's the issue that I wanted to discuss today on the latest article. Once again, it's on the front page of New Eastern Outlook, entitled "California's Governor Brown Strikes Another Blow Against the Vulnerable." And in the remaining few minutes, I would just like to say a few things about what's going on now with Syria, now that Russia has entered the mix and is bombing ISIS. Apparently, it has created a lot of furor in the NATO countries, in the U.S. There is now apparently England is giving its fighter planes permission to fire on Russian planes. The whole situation is becoming very aggravated.
I'm going to stop for 1 second here. I'm going to show you. You get your comment on this. I just threw up some news stories, and you have things like The Guardian is saying Russia military reports 64 raids on ISIS, and then you have the New York Times saying ISIS makes gains in Syria territory after it's bombed by Russia. Like, so they're putting away. But the non-American mainstream medias are all reporting this. I mean, you can go down the list. They're reporting Russia bombing the ISIS areas, except the mainstream U.S.
Right. I know. It's very troubling. I would like to advance a certain perception here, which
Okay.
is that the United States has been, quote unquote, bombing ISIS for some time now without any real impact. It has been detailed by Tony Cartolucci in a number of articles for New Eastern Outlook as to where is the the pipeline for more arms. How is ISIS continuing to get its arms? And the method and the route has been exposed by Tony Cartolucci, and one would think that if one wants to disable a snake, one would go for where he's getting his food, right? But the United States bombing raids have been amazingly ineffective. And I think there have been a lot of questions raised as to what ISIS is and who is supporting ISIS. How did ISIS come into existence, and who is protecting ISIS? And I think that there have been a lot of investigative reports tying the funding for ISIS into, the United States and other Western countries. So, and there equally have been a lot of reports that have made the ISIS-CIA connection. So when Obama throws up his hands and says, "What? You're bombing? You're bombing the moderates. You're bombing our boys." Well, very possibly, if ISIS is a creation of the CIA, it is possible that Russia might be bombing CIA operations.
Oops.
And that would explain the furor that we're seeing in the Western press about, and Obama saying this, and the Pentagon saying this, and everybody wants to attack Russia. Now, that would explain it pretty well, don't you think?
Yeah, it's like, they can't do that. They're bombing our secret, prisons and stuff. I just noticed that NBC News is reporting a story. Some Iraqis are asking Russia to bomb ISIS. They see the U.S. failure to defeat ISIS, and frustrated by the way the U.S. is not doing good. And so Russia comes in and apparently does may lose some ground. And now they're going, hey, you guys come over here and take care of this.
Right.
That'll be interesting to see if Iraq wants Russia to bomb in Iraq, to see what kind of stuff's going on there. And of course, Russia, again, nobody's a good guy in my book. Russia's going to take the advantage of coming in and seeing what they can do as well.
Well, I'd like to make another point as well, which is
Okay.
the U.S. is screaming that, Russia is attempting to, dominate. It wants to invade. It wants to, its actions are inappropriate. It's trying to dominate the region. I'd like to point out that the U.S. That's really the pot calling the kettle black. The U.S. has over 800 bases worldwide outside of the U.S. Right? Russia has one. That would be in Syria. So I think that I think that the lady doth protest too much. The lady,
Yeah.
the Statue of Liberty, U.S. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of confusion going on now worldwide about what in the world is happening. Not only, not only on the domestic front, not only, what's happening in our courts, what's happening with our police, killing all these people with impunity, what's happening, what's also happening on the world stage. I think it's very confusing to people, and I did want to offer this perspective concerning the escalation of tensions now. So that
All right.
it today.
Okay. Well, thanks for making it and sharing, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you, James. Have a good week.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Bye.